Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Our Symposium 3 is going to start now. And without wasting any time, let us welcome our three honorable panelists for Symposium 3. Yang Berbahagia, Dato Seri Ir, Dr. Zaini Ujang, the Secretary General for the Ministry of Environment and Water, Dr. Yasmin Rasyid, the founder of Eco-Nights, and Ms. Norliza Hashim, the CEO of Urbanize Malaysia. And our moderator for our symposium today is Mr. Alizan Mahadi, the Senior Director of Research at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. The title for the symposium is Green Economy, Environmental Sustainability and Its Growth in Malaysia. Now we would like to pass the floor to them. Please welcome our honorable panelists and moderator.
Conference on MUEC 2021. I think quite aptly, the overall theme for this year's conference is Unlocking Malaysia's Future Potential, New Pathways to Sustainability. But the perhaps concern I have here is when we talk about sustainability, I think there's two sides of the story here. We have seen sustainability being used everywhere these days. And in many ways, that is progression from, of course, about 20, 30 years where it was still a new idea. But in another way, what does it really mean when we talk about sustainability? Of course, when we talk about sustainability, it is often related to the environment. But I would like to congratulate the organizers today. It's not only the environment we're talking about, nonetheless, the linkages between the environment and overall development. When we talk about the environment and the green economy specifically, I think about 10 years ago, environment was always seen to be, from economic perspective, a cost. But now, more and more, it is being seen as an opportunity. And quite remarkably, despite the pandemic, we have seen shifts around the world in what people are talking about, a green recovery, a Green New Deal, and so on. So I think for the context of today, we would like to discuss where is Malaysia in terms of its green economy, in terms of sustainability. And for that, we have three very distinguished guests with us today to speak about this topic. Firstly, we have with us Yang Berbahagia, Dato Seri Ir, Dr. Zaini Ujang, who is currently the Secretary General of the Ministry of Environment and Water. He is also an icon for water and environment. He's also a very prolific author. I'm very jealous. I wish I can write as much as Dato Seri. And he's a thought leader in eco-shift thinking, and we are very honored to have you here today, sir. Secondly, we have Ms. Norliza Hashim, who is currently the Chief Executive of Urbanize Malaysia. She's trained as an urban planner, and she's really leading the charge of making our cities more sustainable, and is a leader not only in Malaysia, but I think on a global scale as well, playing a crucial role during the 9th World Urban Forum. And thirdly, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Yasmin Rasyid, who is the CEO and founder of Eco-Nights, and for the last 20 years or so, she has been a grassroots champion in sustainability, community development, social entrepreneurship, and social responsibility in Malaysia. She is also currently the Sustainability Director in Lend-Lease Malaysia, where she is implementing her ideas in the private sector by leading, planning, and implementing sustainability strategies and plans towards a carbon neutral business. As you can all see, the three experts and champions in their fields represent diverse backgrounds and wearing also multiple hats, including government, academia, town planning, grassroots, and private sector. So I'm sure our discussion today will be very interesting with very different perspectives, and I'm sure we will come out of it more insightful after this. So I think we can straight away begin by a few general questions, if I may. I think as I highlighted just now, quite remarkably during this pandemic, although economies have been devastated, there's quite a momentum building in terms of what we call a green recovery, building back better, more sustainably, and so on. Sometimes this is called the Green New Deal and various other names as well. Nonetheless, Malaysia as a developing country, essentially, can we afford to move towards a green recovery? Can we afford not to move towards a green recovery? I think at this moment of time, this is a very important question that our audience, especially the students, would like to understand. So from your perspective, from your different perspectives, fellow panelists, I would like to start with that question first of all. Maybe Dato Seri, if you can give your thoughts first, please, Dato Seri. I think you are muted, Dato Seri. Please unmute.
Thank you for inviting me. It is an honor to speak to my colleagues, panelists, and then the participants. Post-COVID is something very significant for green recovery. Therefore, many countries trying hard to refocus their growth center and growth priorities. Say, for example, in Malaysia, vaccination is not only vaccinating people, but in our program, we have green vaccination. So Malaysia is the only country in the world having green vaccination programs. And we are vaccinating 1.35% of people in Malaysia, regardless their citizenships, on daily basis. First, very clear that we want to make it proper, and we are doing it well. I'm in charge of that at the moment, together with Ministry of Health and MOSTI. So what we are doing, we are calculating the carbon emission from the vaccination process, from the beginning, from the origins of the vaccines and the event itself. I'm expecting, based on our earlier calculations, it will equal to 24 million trees to be planted to offset our vaccination programs. Some of them we ensure that it is not going to be polluting. Say, for example, to ensure that all solid and clinical waste from vaccination center and from COVID-related activities are to be treated properly under clinical waste, and this is something that we have done. So what I'm saying, not only we are talking about post-COVID, but while handling COVID, this is the situation of pandemic. We are still very firm to make it green in terms of practices and what we can do. So that indicates what we can do more than that during normal time. Thank you.
That's remarkable, Dato Seri. When we talk about, again, sustainability, big words, green recovery, we often think about very long-term, 2030, 2050, maybe targets, but this is during the pandemic itself, and this is where we see environmental and sustainability being mainstream across all our actions. So that is very remarkable to see that. Puan Norliza, your views in terms of green recovery in Malaysia, where are we?
Thank you, Alizan, and very nice to see all the panelists this afternoon, Dato Seri and Yasmin. Yes, I agree with Dato Seri. I think coming from the work that I do a lot, which is in cities especially, and we see that this COVID is actually have given new opportunities also for cities. You see cities now realizing that they are at the forefront and they need to actually be taking care of certain things that they was not normally part of their KPI or part of the scope of work that they do. I mean, as you know, a lot of cities or city councils, their core work is to look into managing urban services, managing, providing local services to the community. But today with COVID, and you see a lot of them now even going into providing jobs, ensuring local economy is being kickstarted. Also addressing urban poverty issues on the ground. And definitely when it comes to, when we talk about green recovery, I think it's important that the three elements of economy, social well-being, as well as environment is part of that recovery plan. And we also see that, many cities, even globally, they, of course, when we talk about some of the sustainability work track that has been done, there are some work tracks that actually have, in a way, have been set back, But on the other hand, it has also given them different opportunities for them to look into. And this is where I think COVID is with, during this COVID situation, or even in the road to recovery, sustainability is even more important. Because I think it's not just about the big words that sustainability carries, but it's actually the more granular issues on the ground that needs to be addressed. And if we can look at how to really localize all the sustainable agenda on the ground, I think this is where the road to recovery will be much, much more, I would say, in the more, we will actually be taking the opportunity to make it even better. Because I think we as a country, when it comes to sustainability, it has always been like overlapping. There are times when we are on the right track. There are times when we are not on the right track. But maybe this is a good opportunity to really, really be on the right track, given the situation that we are in. Yeah. So yes, sustainability, green recoveries, I think is more even important during this COVID pandemic.
Certainly, as devastating as it is, it does offer an opportunity to shift and transition. I think we can speak a bit more about that later, but I also want to touch a bit more later on the things that we can do on the ground as well. But we'll come back to that. Yasmin, your views, Dr. Yasmin, on green recovery in the context of Malaysia. Perhaps you can give a view from. I think you're wearing two hats, from the grassroots level as well as perhaps the private sector as well.
Yeah, so in my view, sustainability is such a complex dynamics. It's multidimensional, multifaceted, and I think in this current times post-COVID, while environmental sustainability is still important, but I think how we perform as a reaction to how we dealt with COVID was a clear sign in terms of our weakness in being resilient as a society. So for me, I think green recovery as a topic, while it's critical now, but I think the social aspects of sustainability is even more urgent to address in this particular time post-COVID. So you're talking about, and echoing what Norliza said, employment, mental health, education. These are the more social elements which I think are actually big contributors as well to advance environmental sustainability. And from the industry side, I think we can't deny that the whole carbon conversation is very aggressive these days. And we've seen how detrimental COVID was to business operations and processes. And I feel that there's a lot more opportunities for companies, SMEs, especially now, to look at kickstarting back their businesses with a bit more emphasis on the E's, the S, and the G's. I think this is critical to look at being more of a global player if you talk about moving an economy. And I think from an investment perspective, and when we're talking about economy, if we want to be a country where we are recognized for being responsible in how we deliver our businesses, I think these elements are critical to address today. So perhaps more emphasis on business governance, more support for them to look at making this transition to a greener business smoother, maybe with some incentives. And as for the people, I think the business plays a role as well to look at growing back social resiliency in society. That's my take on it.
Just Yasmin, if I can continue on that in terms of ESG, of course, this has been ESG compliance has been a major issue recently. Do you think generally our firms in Malaysia, companies, are ready to adopt ESG in the context of Malaysia?
I don't think it's a question of whether they're ready or not. I think it should be mandated along the way. But as to what percentage of companies embrace it and understand the importance of it to their shareholders, to their customers, my best guess is perhaps we're quite a far reach from having a solid business ecosystem that actually walks the talk in preaching sustainability. I'm hopeful, but we need to move a bit faster.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to focus a bit, again, when we talk about sustainability, often we link it to climate change, to low carbon development in particular. I think in terms of our climate change, the what we call the COP26, the UNFCCC process is very important. This is where the Paris Agreement was agreed. This is essentially the global agreement on climate change. And I think today was the deadline for updating what we call the nationally determined contributions. So maybe I would like to ask Dato Seri, in terms of our climate change ambition, in terms of our climate change target, where are we at in that sense?
Okay, can I share a slide?
Sure, I think so.
Thank you for the question. I think we need to understand what is Malaysian position in the whole climate change, ecosystem. We are not getting where I'm heading. Window. Okay. First of all, in December 2020, Malaysia, despite COVID pandemic and whatnot, we managed to update our biennial update reports. Yeah, so this is the third biennial update report. You can go to BUR3 Malaysia. You can get this data. It's about 200 pages data, and we realized the importance of focusing on what matters to us. First, in the context of energy, when we would like to go into green economy, we have to address the issue of energy first, because 45% of our total energy sector contribute close to 80% of the GHG, greenhouse gases emission in Malaysia. It was in 2016. Since Malaysia is non-Annex 1 country in terms of classification, so we have to report X-4, which is 2016. So many people ask, why don't you have a better data than this? It is mandated for us to send 2016. We can send a better data, but that's later. And you can see the constant increase in carbon emission and almost stagnant increase in land use and land use change and forestry, which is the lower part of the axis, the light green color. Out of 80% of the energy sector contribution to the carbon emission or GHG emission, electricity contribute 41%. So we have to address electricity issue. So I'm very sure that this is addressed properly. We started our large-scale solar when I was Secretary General, Ministry of Energy, Green Technology and Water, 2016. The first, project took off was 2018. Yeah, 2017 or 2018, I forgot already. And then now, with more injections of renewable energy into the system, this will be reduced. And according to the plan, it will be reduced more than 40% out of 41%. So it will be 40%, 4 times 4, at least you will be getting quite substantial reduction on electricity generation in the near future. The question is transportation, because we have to embark on a new platform, electricity, electric vehicles, or you can have hydrogen. Yesterday we concluded our labs on hydrogen economy. So I think we know what to do on the hydrogen component, assuming we'll be able to reduce that by 2030 by 40%. So that will be marvelous. And what is also important for us is oil and gas industry in the country, which contribute 22%. So if you want to become green, we have to address this issue very clearly. As far as Malaysia is concerned, this is concepts that we have to do. Green technology can reduce the carbon GHG emission, and green cover will reduce the will increase the offsetting value for LULUCF, land use and land use change and forestry. So the system is circular economy, and individually we have to embark on low carbon lifestyle. So this is something that we have to talk about. If you want to, people ask me, how can we go better into green economy? Is by embarking green lifestyle, by embarking on circular economy. So that's my take. Alizan?
Thank you, Dato Seri. I think that dovetails well to what Norliza. Again, when we talk about green lifestyles, cities are at the forefront of implementing essentially low carbon development. We also have, of course, low carbon cities master plan. So, Norliza, can you elaborate a bit more on the role of cities in terms of moving towards low carbon?
Yeah, I think cities cities actually, they are very challenged because they are always imposed with all kinds of things that they need to do. But I think that's unavoidable because, we've got 24 million people actually living in our cities today. So definitely cities are where, like what Dato Seri shows, the energy sector, that's where it's all being consumed as well. And especially when we are driving investments. So again, cities are where the investments mainly goes to. So again, the consumption of energy, the production of waste, it's unavoidable that cities have to manage all this. But at the forefront, when we say cities, we always look at it quite loosely on who we mean by cities, So there are actually those people who actually manage cities, and also people who are actually, all the other players that are also quite responsible to participate in this reduction of carbon. And especially one of them is the people themselves who are living in the cities. But for government themselves, local government, I think since the low carbon cities framework was announced, I was part of that working team that time, and it was actually been quite a slow journey for them. Mainly because, it was not something that they are used to, having to deal with carbon data, trying to understand what it is actually took a while, few years before that capacity building was able to be done. Subsequently, having to have insufficient data for them to understand where they are was also quite a challenge. But I think moving forward, when we combine, especially the work that we do in the Malaysia SDG cities, we try to encourage cities to look at it from an angle where, what is really the pressing issue in their city. So, of course, congestion is one. So then we'll say that, okay, that's carbon emission, Waste management is one. Then we also say, yeah, that's also related to carbon. So I guess, once they understand that, all these problems that they are having is actually correlated. Either it's an environmental issue, or it's a carbon issue, or it's even a bigger, which is the sustainability issue, So at the end of it, then they realize that, yes, it's something that we need to do. But we've done it. So when we did the SGCT, we started by saying that, why don't you map out everything that you have done, even small initiatives or big initiatives, And so, in the cities that we work with, it was quite surprising that they've done quite a lot, but they've not actually managed to stitch together what they've done, because they've not been able to actually understand that, okay, that, some of these initiatives that they are doing, whether it's by themselves or by their partners or by their stakeholders, are actually part of contributing to a solution. So I think that is what is missing sebenarnya. I find it, that even Dato Seri kan, and a lot of the work that we do when we are actually at the policy level, and when we go down on the ground, we find that, this is where is most needed. How do we actually ensure that the work that's being done, every effort that's being done, actually accounts for some form of a solution, So whether, like when we were in Penang, we realized that there was some waste diversion happening at about 40% to the industries, and they were not going to the landfill, for example, So again, there's a reduction in carbon from the trucks that was going normally to Pulau Burong, and again, a lot of saving in terms of environment itself. But this kind of information is not anywhere, unless you do a proper study, then you get the information. So I think here is an issue where I don't think, because we embrace sustainability since Rio 1970s, and then we had all our environmental acts coming into place. I don't think it's also fair to say that we've not done something, but we've not done it cohesively, or we've not really measured it as together. And I think that's what is missing, especially from the work that we do on the ground. We realize that they themselves have done a lot, but they have not actually monitored, they have not managed, they're not tracking what they're doing, and that actually can be not so cost effective also, So I think these are, I would say that low carbon is something that they've been doing unconsciously, but here is where a situation where we want them to understand that it's important for them to manage and monitor, because that would mean that whatever solution that they opt for will lead to better management of carbon reduction. So I think that's where it is. The situation is today, lah.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge as well, where climate change really cuts across all sectors. And to capture the data is also difficult, but also to coordinate the implementation is a challenge as well. Yasmin, in terms of climate change, again, I'm sorry for asking you to wear these two hats, but from the private sector point of view, especially globally, there's a lot of focus recently on the net zero emissions push, especially by investors as well. Is that something we are seeing in the context of Malaysia? But also, if we can answer from the grassroots as well, is there a lot of awareness, understanding from the grassroots level to push more smaller kind of interventions for reducing carbon emissions?
Well, with the specificity of talking about the cities, I think the low carbon narrative is more pertinent right in the city center. And I think when you talk about the city, I think there is still a lot of room for a lot more migration to happen in the city. I believe in a couple of decades more time, our population in KL will probably balloon up to double the number that we see today. When you have an influx of more people coming in, whether for job or to live, I think the stress would be on making sure buildings are able to perform, shelter people, and buildings itself is contributing to 40% global emissions, from your cement, your concrete, operations, energy, burning fuel. So I think if we want to push this low carbon pathway into fruition, what is critical is accountability in measuring and disclosing carbon. I think we're still maybe in baby steps in this country. I think there is a lot of opportunities for us to develop the green economy by having more low carbon experts in this country. and fueling the industry with this kind of human resources as well. I look at city low carbon narrative in two prongs. One is clearly addressing the climate risk and how do you mitigate and adapt to it. And the other is about people resilience. Now, I think going to where I am in my industry, we're currently building TRX City. I think one of the first things we did when we wanted to ensure that we're building a sustainable precinct is to first and foremost do a study on climate change adaptation and resilience. I think we're probably the first developer to do a CCAR, climate change adaptation resilience study. The idea of this whole study is to help inform us on what sort of best options we have here when it comes to making a building not just perform sustainably, but able to last for at least 50 to 100 years and is yielding a good ROI. And in KL, balik-balik is perhaps this 4 high-level climate risk, which is your heat wave, urban flood, air, and water scarcity. So just tackling these 4 climate risks, I think is a good start to look at building the resiliency of the places that we build. So we're quite happy that we've got technology in place. I'm sure many of you have heard of Veolia, which is a wastewater system that is converting all our precinct wastewater into reusable water for non-potable use. So immediately that responsibility we felt needs to be taken by us as a developer. So what we're doing right now is making sure that we are able to minimize the use of natural resources. Of course, all our buildings are certified, but more importantly now we're looking at how do we work towards developing a carbon neutral precinct or development. So it's not rocket science. I think a lot of these technologies and solutions are everywhere, but what makes that big differentiator is how the industry embraces it and actually implements it. So we need a bit more, I think, support to some of the industry players to look at how we can actually catalyze more companies and more private players to actually take that climate narrative to the next level. Lastly, I just want to say, if you can't measure it, I don't see how you can talk about an impact of any effort. So if we want to work towards a low carbon pathway, we have to get a basic formula out there to help companies understand where are the areas to measure it. If you know where your baseline is, then you can understand what are the reduction you can do. And then you can talk about, is it within scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and how do I have control to make sure that I can work towards net zero carbon. So it is quite technical to a certain extent, but I think it's necessary because at the end of the day, and it's coming to us soon, we're talking about carbon taxes, we're talking about polluters pay. So I think it's very much in that horizon already. And I think here in Malaysia, with the recent conversation on sustainability, I really hope I don't have to wait too long to see the next generation of business owners or leaders or politicians who can really walk the talk in this arena.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Boleh saya sambung tak?
Please, Dato Seri.
Yeah. I prepared something for us to otherwise we might not be able to visualize what's happening now. Okay, this is can you see me?
Not
Boleh
yet.
nampak?
Okay, yes. We can
Okay.
see.
So these are initiatives and activities related to climate change this year and next year. Completion of Malaysia updated NDC to UNFCCC done yesterday. Yeah. Preparation of Malaysia. This is very important. NDC means that our commitment. And instead of stating 45% of GDP carbon emission reduction by GDP, 45%. With condition, we this time, after discussion with almost all stakeholders at ministry and agencies, we decided to omit the word conditions. It means that without support from foreign countries, we are still able to do it. Carbon intensity. So there are 3 ways to do it. To calculate, as mentioned by Yasmin, we can use BAU, business as usual basis, or we can do in terms of specific amount of carbon to be removed, or we can use based on intensity by GDP. So Malaysia, Singapore, and few other countries are using by intensity. And then the second point that we updated, instead of 3 GHG greenhouse gases that we indicated in the past, we are now extending it to 7. So this is a proactive measures by Malaysia to show that we are able to reduce the trend in the future. The second point that we are now busy with will be on our first national communication and BOR4 that will be next year. And this year we will be starting working on climate change legal framework. The team already started about few months ago, and also carbon market mechanism, as mentioned by Yasmin. We need to have that in place. So hopefully by Q4 this year, we'll be able to do that. And we are also going to review our climate change policy 2009, which I think is already obsolete, because during our the formation or establishment of the policy, Paris Agreement was not yet in place. And then the most important, whether we want to have net zero carbon or carbon neutral by 2050, based on the study that we are going to conclude or we're going to start next year, long-term low emission development strategy. As non-Annex 1 country, Malaysia is not obligated to do it earlier than what is specified in our program. So we are still on track. In fact, when we submitted last year, our biennial update report, many countries in the world failed to do it. Yeah, we still managed to do it. National Adaptation Plan, which is very important, we started the work this year. You must remember that when I said that we started this year because of my CAC, Malaysia Climate Action Commission just started this year in April. So after April, after endorsement by the council, and then we expedite our process. And this year, which is very important, I think technically the most important is the final one, which is Greenhouse Gas Center, Inventory Center to be specific. Yeah. So by doing that, we will be able to have a framework in the future for people to really understand what to be reduced, how to calculate, who are going to verify the calculation and whatnot. Inventory, yeah. So I'm changing that. Okay, that's all. I think that's helped to understand what Yasmin mentioned just now.
Yes, and I think Norliza also mentioned about the data. So hopefully all that will
so greenhouse gas inventory will help on the data parts.
Yes. But Dato Seri, I think going back a bit to what you mentioned, because maybe we have the audience in terms of students before we open up to the floor. You know, many large systemic issues that rightly need to be addressed. We discuss data, we discuss technology, the energy grid system, and so on. And sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming, perhaps. So just a simple question. If you were a student now, where do we start in terms of...
Me? Yeah, I'm still a student of life.
We are all still students. So maybe Dato Seri, you can start. What
Yeah.
are the small steps we can do?
So I think the main problem, there are two environmental perspectives you can have. One is local pollution. Second one is global. The local pollution, the most difficult and most pressing at the moment is plastic bottle, or plastic. One single-use plastic. That's the most pressing, I think. So if I were a student, I will start a startup on plastic bottle projects. It could be converted into many things. We received an application for a company from Scotland to come to send their composite material that can be used in our highways, the building of our highways. So I think we have more than Scotland in terms of plastic bottles. Then that can be used here locally. So the technology is not that difficult. So if I were a student, I will start a startup on plastic bottle. That's number one. That's huge. In Indonesia, say for example, in Surabaya, plastic bottle is costed and is priced. If you want to take a city bus in Surabaya, you can bring small plastic bottle. You have to bring 5, and then you can travel anywhere. Big plastic bottle you have to you clean and then you bring to the conductor. So you on the 1 liter is about 1.5 liter is about 3. So the second one, I'll develop an apps on river trails in the country. So start up. So I can, people say for example, I'm free today. What can I do in KL? So instead of just going for shopping or cari-cari makan, I can also going for hiking in KL. It's a nice one. But there is no facilities, no apps to do that. And you can charge people based on, say, for example, subscription or, the advertisement that you find easily. Yeah, this is 2 things on top of apps for use cooking oil. So a lot of people have cooking oil now. If you can make a simple apps, and address the issue of I have one, you have one. So crossing my house, I will tell you at 1 o'clock today, there will be a lorry collecting. Then that costs, the pricing is 6 ringgit per liter or something like that. Yeah. And then people will waiting for you. And you can charge 20%.
You can, this is the green economy at a smaller scale, Dato Seri. So
yeah. I'm talking about student if I were to.
Yes, exactly. Talking about the smaller scale, Norliza, some small steps that students can do at the city level, perhaps?
I think there's a lot of things that students can do at the city level. First of all, is try to be part of any kind of community that's actually moving in the same direction. Be part of that. Join them so that you could also understand what are the pressing issues. Because sometimes when you want to start with a solution, Dato Seri dah bagi idea dah tadi for them apa nak buat. But if you really don't know where to start, the best is actually try to understand what the issues are on the ground. So I think as a student, we all remember, it's being a student, your mind are not, you're still fresh. You don't have, you're not so cluttered. So I think if you can go on the ground, understand the issues on the ground, maybe ensure that whatever solutions that you decide to bring, it must meet the needs of the people most. Because I find that a lot of us, when we are already, doing our work, sometimes when we're writing policies or we're writing solutions, we have other things to consider. But I think going fresh, understanding the issues on the ground, working with people, as many people as possible, I think that will give the correct start to deciding, you know, what do you want to do, what is the approach that you want to choose, you know, for yourself. Because I think when you talk about the city, the dimensions on environment, it's really huge. So you have to choose in which area that you want to focus in. And you know, some might be looking at waste, some might be just talking about the impact of environment to women, for example. So there are many agenda. We always talk about the easier one, which is the, you know, going on the technological solution, but there are a lot of it which are more social based as well, and those are areas which I think we need to also connect to, because one of the biggest impact of environment or climate change or disaster is always on community, on their well-being, you know. And I think this also needs to be properly sort of you know, put together, not just from the aspect of hand holding or you know, having shoulders to cry on. I think it should be more than that. Programs that could allow them to be more resilient in the sense of developing any forms of entrepreneur programs or programs that could help them get on their feet. So I think if you know, as a student, I think that's where the dimensions are important, because like the work that we do in SDGs, for example, it's important to also understand that everything is interlinked. Everything is there is no one SDG by itself, or there is no one issue that actually it's on its own. So that is why it's very important to try to map it out as best as you can, and, you know, put sustainability at the center of any form of decision or any form of choice. And I think that would be a good start for someone fresh and young, you know, and not be cluttered. Because if you look at the policy, we have so many policies at the top, and some of the policies are also very silo. They only, if you read the objectives, you know, they are meant to solve one problem. But in the case of environmental sustainability, these are things which needs a much bigger dimension to be looked at. So I think that exploration for a young person, it's important, how they explore and understand these issues on the ground.
Yes, learning and education is increasingly problem-driven rather than disciplinary-driven as we move along as well.
Yeah.
So interdisciplinary education is also very important, and also an opportunity for as you say, kind of fresh minds for the younger brothers. Yasmin, you've had tremendous experience on the ground working with communities. Where do we start?
Well, I like to think of myself as a student addressing this question. And I think starting, if you're going to start at tertiary education level, it's even more critical to look at how we align awareness and sustainability to students from all disciplines. And I think if you're a student tuning in right now, I think what fundamentally is, if there's no understanding of your relationship or your impact to sustainability, environment, and social, I think that is the failure of us being motivated to do anything. And I think universities should be clearly highlighting this man and environment relationship very clearly. For every impact we see in the environment, it has to come from us. It's not that environment suka-suka buat sendiri and hurt itself. And secondly, universities function through faculties, to departments, very interdisciplinary. And I think that's another second critical thing to look at in terms of tertiary education. Creating opportunities for students to know how to apply their passion or interest in sustainability across wider scopes of fields. If you're an engineer, maybe within the realm of sustainability, you'll be more on engineering solutions. or if you're an economist or an educator, there's always something that you can contribute directly to sustainability. It doesn't matter what academic preference you choose to. And thirdly, I think it's also about creating an ecosystem that's conducive for students to take action, to voice out, to be critically analyzing or critically thinking about solutions for sustainability. I agree with Norliza in terms of, as a student, one of the best ways is to engage with communities, NGOs, community groups. Universities have really good sustainability groups as well. But bearing in mind that we need to be inclusive. Having the academic approach to sustainability is one way. And I think this is where we need to be mindful about things like being empathetic and relevant to community. Oftentimes, we sit in the silo and comfort of the university, thinking up solutions, and fail short in applying it within the real context. But I see that really evolving today. You see a lot of emphasis by faculties to look at that engagement with community, that engagement with business community, so that they can look at transferring what happens in an academic ecosystem and solving a problem in real life for society, for the environmental community. So I think it's very dynamic times right now. And all of you don't have problem accessing information. All of you don't have accessing top-notch research papers as well. It's really now about how you leverage on 4 years of experience in university to connect those dots. And again, I resonate with our panel speakers as well. University period is probably the best time to push the boundaries on your engagement in sustainability. You have more time, you're probably more of a social bug, and you don't have the burden of a 9 to 5 and having to feed your family. So these critical 4 years will create the future CEOs, the future leaders, the future managers that will hopefully aspire to govern the country sustainably. So as a summary, I think universities play a very critical role. I really hope to see a bigger alignment among universities to really look at solving real life industry challenges with sustainability out there.
Thank you, Yasmin. Okay, I'm going to move to the questions from our audience. They've been submitting questions through Slido. We've already received quite a few. Please have those questions coming, keep on coming. Do identify, if possible, who you are directing the question to. So the first question I have is, according to Dato Seri Zaini Ujang, we require 53 million trees to be planted in order to offset CO2 from the
24 million.
24 million. Okay, but the question is, where are we going to plant?
Yeah, you know that Prime Minister recently announced the programs to plant 100 million trees in the country by 2025. So there are many places and many organizations, including ministries and agencies, are required to do that. So on top of spending money based on government coffer, we can also open this to private sector. Say, for example, under the various programs on supporting green economy and individual as well. I'm say, for example, Yasmin, you are right. We have to go down. I'm president of 2 NGOs, Yasmin, for information. I'm president and founder of Friends of Rivers Malaysia. We started in 2016, Friends of Langat Rivers. So almost every weekend, we spend time, a group of us, I think we have about 41, 42 groups now. Each group has at least 10 people. So they have chosen their site to work on. And from time to time, we share information through social media, and sometimes we meet up to discuss what best we can do. So the idea is to give people opportunity to get closer to the river ecosystem. That's number one. The second thing, when people aware that their river ecosystem is part of their livelihood, this is where they get their water resources. Then I hope that it can create an interest for them to look after the river as well. You mentioned about where to be planted. So we have already, as public servant, we also having a policy in place to develop 10,000 kilometer river trails in the country. We have 80,000 kilometer river in the country. If you take both sides, 160. So we have already chosen a length of 10,000 kilometer. And earlier, Puan Norliza mentioned about 11 kilometer already done in Kuala Lumpur along the river. I mean, it's not only along the river, but in many places in Kuala Lumpur. So what we can do next is to connect them. So therefore, we need startup to link everything. Then at the end of the day, we know that, okay, this is important trail for us to connect. And then we have the loop of 20 kilometer or 100 kilometer from, say, for example, one location to the destination. So the question asks where to plant. With 10,000 kilometer river trails, we need a lot of trees. Yeah, so we made assumption. The one that we had here in Bangi, I think we had planted not less than 3,000 trees, and that is in area of less than 3 kilometers. You just imagine we need. And I received this morning, my friend gave me rambutan or manggis is from that site. Yeah, so by having a lot of activities, and we don't say that only this department in charge, only this person in charge, and we will not be able to do that. My take is very simple. There are plenty of places for us to plant. And at the same time, people are cutting trees. So we have to replant from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato Seri. Puan Norliza, as an urban planner, where to plant, and if you can elaborate a bit as well in terms of the planting process. In terms of perhaps is there a need for gazetting land, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good point, I think, because we seem to be planting trees based on campaigns, kan? So whereas in the old days, there are some villages that used to plant a tree for every child that was born, I always remember that stories that the elderly people tell us. So I think that could be one. We should restart some of these very old, not to say culture, but very old way of how villagers used to try to remember. They even plant trees to demarcate their boundaries. I remember my grandmother's house when I was small. It doesn't have pagar, kan? Doesn't have any gates. So, but they know their land is that from that tree to the other tree, and so that somehow or other people plant trees those days for many reasons, and I think if people understand, trees are not just we plant trees not only for the fruits, for sustenance of food security. I think then we can bring the fact that we also plant trees for environment. So I think from planning point of view, we have been talking about plants now or trees in many different forms. First, already we are having difficulty in trying to make sure that we keep at least the ratio of 20 square meters to a person in cities, because that's based on our national physical plan that encourage green areas. But it's in some big cities, it's becoming difficult to have that ratio, and we are down to about 11.5 square meters per person in Kuala Lumpur. So I think for when places get developed, so we need now to change our strategy on how we look at trees, how to go for canopy coverage, not only in terms of numbers, but going for canopy coverage, going for gazette of trees which are very special, if they are of a certain age or they are very significant. I think that is a tree preservation order which we don't really use much of the part of the Act 172. And of course, now we are also encouraging what we call the vertical green or the green replacement. So we started to encourage that to bigger cities like KL, Penang, where urban density have actually gone much higher. So like in KL, we are suggesting like 50% green replacement. In Singapore, green replacement have actually gone all the way up to 180%. So it's amazing to see what started as something difficult to do, impossible to do, to replace whatever land coverage upwards, have become something, that people are embracing easily in that city. And of course, once we talk about that, we can talk about, bringing in the concept of biophilic into cities. So I think these are things which are happening now. A lot of the cities are bringing this nature-based resource, a lot of things are coming into planning documents today. So I think when we talk about planning, we talk about policy, we talk about strategy, we've actually got it all. But I think at the end of the day, we also cut as many trees at the same time, Every time we do development, we cut the trees faster than we plant them. So I think this is our challenge, On one hand, we can count the numbers that we plan, but we don't seem to count the numbers that we cut down. And that's something that I think we do need an inventory. We do need a database. Maybe we can add on to Dato Seri's greenhouse database, or one of it should be also trees. Could be something that we did. So when I was in kan Dato Seri, that's something boleh buat juga kan?
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Our Ministry of Environment and Water has made a internal policy that every 350 kilometer of journey, we have to plant a tree. So assuming we, officers, ministers and deputies, traveling for 2021, 3,500 kilometer. So it means that we have to plant 1,000 trees. Jadi caranya nak plant tu sama ada dia nak bagi secara voluntarily. There are system in place that we developed, or we can use some of our additional money here and there to plant the trees to offset our activities. So this is, I think, a simple way to show that we are committed to embark on green lifestyle. We can talk about it, but when it comes to actual implementation, you are not able to drive, say for example, low carbon vehicles, or to cycle or to walk. And then you can offset by using, as I mentioned earlier in my slides, by planting trees. So despite, this is not the ideal situation, but at least you do something.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of questions regarding green market. One question here is, can a green economy and green development exist in the absence of green markets? Perhaps Yasmin, would you like to attempt to answer that?
No, I don't. I think green economy and market move hand in hand. I don't think you can separate those two items as independent items. I think that's my short answer to that question.
Okay. I think green market is misleading terminology that used. If you talk about carbon market, yes, that is the initiative that, as I mentioned earlier, that we are this year there are going to be a mechanism for carbon market in the country developed. Singapore started this year. They started the work about 2 years ago, and it takes them about 2 years to get it implemented. So you per kilogram of carbon, if I'm not mistaken, is 5 Sing dollar. So you can trade with that. In Malaysia, before we do that, we have to have a registry. So who can say that you are producing or you are buying? Therefore, we need greenhouse gas inventory center to ensure that someone is collecting data. And finally, it will come into our BUR. It will translate it into our reporting of NDC and long-term low emission development strategy and whatnot. So we have to do. Otherwise, it will not be translated into documents or data that mentioned by Yasmin, which is very important. We have to be able to measure them. So I'm so sorry why so late. The ministry started about a year ago, slightly more than a year ago, and a lot of things happening at the end of last year when we came to the ministry as a new ministry, not enough people. We started with just a couple, handful of people. We managed to do it. And then, and there are priorities required. Therefore, we go by priorities as indicated in my earlier slides. Yeah.
Okay, just going to pick up a few other questions. I think a lot of them is directed to you, Dato Seri.
My God, I should be paid for this.
Well, one question is, why are we committing based on GDP intensity? Our GDP.
So as I mentioned, there are three ways to do it. We can use a BAU, business as usual. Say, for example, this, and then you want to reduce by 24%. It's what Indonesia is doing. Business as usual. Korea is doing based on business as usual. Japan is using based on quantum, means how much carbon they want to remove. They quantify the quantum, and then they dedicate this company. You have to reduce by, assuming X tons of carbon CO2 equivalents by so and so. This is options available, and we have decided earlier to use carbon intensity. And we also, together with countries like Singapore and a few others, think that is easier way to track. Otherwise, you have to calculate. You just imagine we just started to think about greenhouse gas inventory. Yeah, this year, 2025, and yet you want a quantum of it to be distributed equals. I think we don't have time for that. If you go to carbon intensity, we have collected data. The data that I've mentioned earlier based on carbon intensity. Yeah, so it's much easier, and then we can keep track carbon intensity very easily. This is an option available under reporting of NDC to UNFCCC. So I don't want to speculate and to criticize my predecessors for their options. I value their decision. Yeah.
Okay. This one is perhaps open to all. We're asking, why are we not modeling a green growth agenda based on the EU approach? I think this is referring to the European Green Deal. Perhaps, Norliza, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm not sure what the EU Green Deal is about. Not so sure which part they are referring to. But yeah, I guess when you're talking about Green Deal, it's still very much related to the three elements of sustainability. It's still related. So, but I'm not really sure what the EU's view on that is. I used to look at how they are targeting their, how EUs are targeting collectively on their SDG targets. That I'm aware, which is also amazing to see how different nations in EU could actually collectively agree on a list. Some of the targets that they shared. But yeah, I'm not so sure on the EU actually, Alizan. I'm not sure whether the rest of the panelists, maybe they can shed more light on that.
Yeah. We presented a paper to, okay, I don't want to be too detailed on that. Okay. A government acts as far as climate change is concerned in 4 ways. One is to set up a regulations. Second is to tweet on taxation. And then the third one is incentive, including subsidy, including projects to develop. And the fourth one is punitive. Punitive means if you don't do this, you are not able to do this business, or your license will be limited or whatever. So in Malaysia, we are good in number 1 and number 3. Number 1 is regulation and incentive. Therefore, we built sewage treatment plant through subsidy. Say, for example, the one in Langat sewage treatment plant, 1.6 billion is a subsidy. So the users or the beneficiaries are not paying the capex. Capex is all done by government. In European countries, almost all major infrastructure related to environment is paid by the users. Yeah. So therefore, not only the taxation is high, but also the cost of environmental services are very high. I give you an example. My friend from Sweden mentioned to me during summer last year, summer in particular, he has to pay 40 USD for 10 cubic meter of water that they use for the house. Jadi dia gunakan lebih kurang 40 cubic meter during that summer. So they have to pay 40 times 40, 160 lah USD, which is within 3 months. Ya, itu berapa tu? Sedangkan di Malaysia, the first 20 is fully subsidized for certain group of people. Before PRU 14 free semua, termasuk orang kaya pun free. So indirectly, government is not only subsidizing the capex but also subsidizing the opex. From environmental regulation point of view, it is difficult to create awareness among public on water security and water efficiency. The other thing is on taxation. European countries are very good in changing taxation strategies. Say, for example, countries in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the rest, they change the behavior of the people by changing the regime of tax. Say, for example, if you still using, say, for example, petrol car or diesel, your license road tax will be triple next year. So masing-masing tukar. Ya, sebab dia tahu the following year akan naik lagi 5 times. So indirectly they regulate, and we are not doing that. We cannot do that. Kita nak naikkan harga air pun orang it's a political issue. Ya, sedangkan air is necessity. In their context, they can treat big policy with taxation. Yeah, so and then they allocate that money. The money for those who are still producing carbon this much through transportation will be used to fund, say, for example, their pedestrian, their cycling facilities and whatnot. So people know that they will get more and more, sedangkan orang yang menggunakan kereta to get less and less. So this is how they play with it. This is when they think about Green Deal, it means that a lot of beneficiaries will be on green initiatives. And they will take up from initiatives that produce a lot of carbon. The sector that produce a lot of carbon will be taxed very heavily. That's how they do it. Kita boleh buat lah, tapi kalau boleh buat, berani kena buat. Siapa yang nak buat?
Yeah. But the challenge, if I can add there, Dato Seri, the challenge might be EU are looking to implement that carbon tax across borders as well.
Yep.
Carbon adjustment border tax. So maybe indirectly, Malaysia will be affected by that, even if not directly by the government. Yeah? So but yes, this is the challenge in terms of
Yeah, and then the culture of the people. I have a lot of friends in Scandinavian countries. My co-authors mainly from Sweden and Denmark. If you go through my academic writing, and they are so proud to say that I'm paying the bracket of 67% of income tax. 67%, and very proud to say that I'm already there. And when I congratulated one of my friends from Denmark Technical University for being promoted, he said that, Zaini, yes, I've been promoted, but take home pay I receive less because they fall into that category. But they feel proud because they're contributing a lot in terms of taxation.
this is part of the eco shift, Dato Seri.
That's part of the lifestyle and mindset and eco shift.
Okay, we have a question here. Perhaps Yasmin, you spoke about education as well earlier. Do you think our country needs to develop pro-ecological education for the students? Yasmin, would you like to respond?
That's a tough question. I always thought that I went to a sekolah kebangsaan. I always thought how I was taught in school and the books, the topics were very conducive for me to appreciate, respect the environment. I'm not sure what happened along the way, but I owe a lot to my fundamental education in school, to where I am today in terms of what I do. So there's no harm in having more pro-ecological topics. I know for a fact, I mean, just looking, my daughter is in standard 6, and I'm just looking at her textbooks. Banyak juga elemen about alam sekitar is inserted into various subjects. So I'm not sure if just having more materials that are pro-ecological is the solution. I think it's about having teachers that are passionate about it or know how to teach ecological lessons are critical. Schools having facilities or access to nature programs and outdoor programs or sustainability programs is critical. Parent support at home to encourage their children to do more at school on the ecological side is also critical. So while I applaud the idea of you can never run short of more ecological materials out there, I think it's more pertinent now, but I don't think that itself would be the one solution to make that difference. We're all going to be parents one day, and I think more important than books, what are we doing as parents at home that can instill sustainability values? I think that should be something. Or you as a student, when you go back to your kampong, you go back to see your parents, what are you as the future leader of the country able to change at home in terms of values towards sustainability? I think that is even more difficult to change than just saying I want this and I want that in this system and that system. Kena tengok kita sendiri dulu before we put suggestions out there. Yeah.
So not just the syllabus as well, is the changing the culture is essential. Okay, let me just go to a few more questions. Okay, we have a question here. Will the coronavirus pandemic increase the importance of environmental sustainability? I think we touched on this a bit, but maybe Norliza, I open to you first.
Yeah, I think it has a quite strong relationship, health, environment, it's sustainability. Definitely with the pandemic, you can see a lot of cities just leapfrogging into some of these solutions. So I think that definitely with the COVID-19, it has speed up a lot of thinking about why didn't we do it. For example, Dato Sri was mentioning about low carbon mobility. So we know for a fact that there has been cities which are micro-mobility numbers have actually gone up, mainly because it's a personal mobility device. So people are careful with health issues, and at the same time, in a way, unconsciously they were actually contributing to better environment. So in Singapore, the numbers have doubled up, and even cities like Rome, who never had micro-mobility, has that. Lots of cities have speed up their autonomous vehicle projects. Again, for the very reason of being in a more controlled environment, which is health, safety, and environment. So unconsciously, we are seeing a lot of this movement now. During last year's lockdown, we saw London, just expanding the width of their bike lanes because suddenly it was too narrow. They needed that space. Pedestrian walkways, loading and unloading bays, because there's not so much activities. Pedestrian walkways was also increased because people need more space, tak nak berlaga with one another. So I was excited because, these are things that we've been always, as planners, we want our pedestrian to be minimum 1.5, or if we can get 2 meters, we are very happy, but we can never get that. So we are normally satisfied when we get 1.5 meters. So to see all these changes in a lot of cities, because of health reason, security reason of the pandemic, it has actually led to a very unconscious effort to actually embrace solutions which are towards better environment and sustainability. So I think that was what I meant, that it was actually some of the small opportunities. So for example, we see our MRTs crashing down to negative 75% ridership, and all cities were the same. But technology came in. Now people are looking at needs rather than just all these fleets going. So there are now systems just recalibrating on how to actually cater for spacing it out because of the different demand, different kind of travel direction. So what was something that was very scary in the beginning, what this new normal have brought upon is actually solutions which I think has gone into better health, better environment. So I'm hopeful that we must keep on going. I hope that we don't stop and we don't move back, just because we think COVID is one day going to be over, all of us will be vaccinated. I think we should move on and make these our new standards, our new guidelines, and I think that's very important.
Would the other panelists like to add to this question? If not, I'll ask one final question. We have about 7 minutes left. There is a question here on what are the main determinants of green economy. So if we can highlight this as a takeaway in the context of Malaysia, and perhaps your final remarks to close this session, that would be great. Can I move the opposite direction now? Maybe Yasmin first. What, in your views, are the main determinants, perhaps priorities as well, in terms of green economy, and your closing remarks?
Thanks, Alizan. Sad that we're almost done with this program. I think I like to put, in terms of a hierarchy, governance as a critical issue. I think that is a big umbrella to establish. Without proper governance, your E, your S, your Gs are all going to be disarray. The second emphasis would be on, I'll go back to education. I think education is intergenerational, and whatever investments we make today to look at creating awareness, embrace, action towards sustainability does come from the values we create in the education system. So I'm thinking And I say these two things because I'm looking at my children and thinking, what would make sustainability still in the forefront of their lives, you know, in 20, 30 years' time? And I can clearly see these two things. So one, we really need to set our differences and look at what a future that is harmonious and sustainable like for all Malaysians in 2050, 2080. Number two, what sort of security we're giving to our children today vis-a-vis education that cannot just make intelligence is one thing, but create jobs, make them relevant, make them be leaders and champions. I think that for me are two critical things. Thanks, Aliza.
Thank you, Yasmin. Norliza?
For me, I think I would like to bring the importance of integration here. Integration in terms of from the very high level, in terms of the policies that we have. You know, there are some countries where you have a Ministry of Policy Integration even, you know, and or they look at sustainability as one. Here we have to open maybe 10 policy documents to just to write one sustainability document. So I think integration is important from the very top, our policies, you know, and subsequently once that integration can be done, because the challenges are cross-sectorial, so the policy integration is definitely needed, you know. And then that's the execution part, you know. Again, it needs that integration, it needs that symbiosis, you know. If we could have a situation where we are doing programs and we don't need to think about just one outcome, but multiple outcomes, you know, it would be wonderful. And if we could put like 5, you know, ministries together, just doing one program, again, that would be super wonderful, you know. So because I think at the end of the day, when we are writing some of these documents for cities, we are also understanding that, you know, it's very challenging because they are always asked to translate, to localize. But I think it's very challenging to be on the ground to try to localize something that is very high level when you are actually dealing with the issues on an everyday basis, you know, at the 3 feet level. So this is where the importance of integration, the importance of cross-sectorial and symbiosis, you know, has that very close relationship. And I think if we can get that going for every program, every project that we do, you know, we could really achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Norliza. Dato Seri, you have the final word.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to conclude by saying this. I'm so sorry I use this because easier for me to explain, otherwise you'll not be able to see. In the context of EcoShift, it's a book that I've written in 2018. Whatever we planned as ministry, as agencies, we need to strategize. And then we need to implement. So the implementation is where I think we stuck. Sometimes because our financial is not sufficient, because we cannot get buy-in from implementation agencies, and from time to time we have to improve, and we get a set of outputs. So when you do that, we are working within the organization. This is what I call organizational domains. We spend resources and time, but people at large are not going to be changed at all if we do that, yeah, unless we try to enter into personal domains. When Dr. Yasmin mentioned about her daughter, her family. So we are talking about personal domains. And in order to develop a culture, we have to understand two things. One is what habits are, what habits and behaviors are. Often we focus on behavior, especially economists. Behavioral economics, then you require two. One is incentive and punitive. And we know that in life, only about 5 to 10% that we do based on behavior, which is conscious mind. Habits is subconscious mind. We do it because we don't have to think about it. We do it on daily basis. cleanliness, to choose to walk instead of to use motorcycle and whatnot. That's all behavioral. Therefore, we need public participation by informing, consulting, involving, and collaborating. Then we get a set of outcomes. So I just give you an example, a set of outcomes that we can do. If you do environmental policy, you will not going to change people from personal domains. They can be changed, but at their level, but they will go back to their original habits later when they leave the country, or they are no longer government servant or something like that. And this is where we have to understand the importance of ecosophy or ecological philosophy. So some of my books that I've written recently are based on ecosophy, where people change because of their mindset, because of their belief. In Western perspectives, for example, the terminology of carbon footprint are Western. If you do that in Islamic community, you will not get any impact significantly unless you say that this is halalan and tayyiban. Riding motorcycle is halal, but having poor exhaust or using that kind of fossil fuel is not good. In Japanese, they call it mottainai. Green growth, we have to convert the concept of Khalifa in the context of green growth. Lifestyle, ihsan. You don't have to get people to monitor your lifestyle, because you know that God is watching at you. Yeah, and the context of Japanese, they call it kami. So this is something that I think when we want to change into green ecosystem, green economy, we need people that buy the products, that demand the products, that supply the products, that coming with the lifestyle, that accept the principles of the services and the products. So I think on top of environmental policy, I'm in charge of that. I'm not saying that is not important. That's very important, but you cannot do much. The KPIs for environmental policy is budget spending, rating, index, things like that. So we don't talk about people migrating. We don't talk about people improving in terms of their habits and behavior. Yeah, this is different spectrum altogether. Then this is within the domain of ecological philosophy. So thank you, Alizan and University Malaya Club, for inviting us.
Thank you, Dato Seri. We are 2 minutes over time, so I won't give a lengthy conclusion, but I think what we have heard is that, once again, there are various systemic issues that we can discuss when we talk about environmental sustainability, and rightly so, which requires integration. Nonetheless, part of that system is human beings. Part of the system is us, and if we talk from a systems point of view, the assemblage, is the personal, the personal dimension, and hence even when we talk about the potential systemic solutions such as taxes we discussed, that requires also buy-in from us, all of us. So this is the whole of society approach that we require to address this issue. So with that, I would like to once again thank you to all our distinguished speakers for sharing their thoughts, sharing their insights on this topic. I would like to thank MUEC as well for inviting us for this session, and thank all of you for listening to us despite being late on a Saturday afternoon and almost evening now. With that, I hand it back to the MC. Thank you very much.